I never expected a delayed train to bring my first love back into my life. If anything, I thought that chapter was permanently closed. Some people leave your life and become memories. Others leave scars. Mason somehow managed to become both. The funny thing is, I hadn't thought about him much for years. At least that's what I told myself. Then one rainy Friday evening, I was standing on a crowded platform with a suitcase in one hand and a coffee in the other when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Tanner! For a second, I froze. I knew that voice. My stomach dropped before I even turned around. And there he was, Mason. 5 years older than the version that lived in my memories. 5 years older than the guy who had broken my heart without ever officially being mine. For a moment, we just stared at each other. He looked different. Broader shoulders, slight stubble, a dark jacket that probably cost more than my entire week's salary. But his eyes hadn't changed. Same blue eyes, same stupid smile. The smile that used to make me forget how to breathe. Wow, he said softly. I can't believe it's actually you. I laughed nervously. Yeah, apparently I still exist. That earned a genuine laugh from him. God, even hearing that laugh again felt dangerous. We stood awkwardly while passengers moved around us. The station speaker announced another delay. 30 minutes. Of course. What are the chances? Mason asked. Honestly, I said. Probably terrible. He smiled. And for a second it felt exactly like being 19 again. Back then we'd met during our first year of college. He wasn't my boyfriend. That was the problem. He was my best friend. Or at least the closest thing I'd ever had to one. We spent almost every day together. Studied together. Ate together. Got into trouble together. Everybody assumed we were dating. Sometimes even professors. We'd laugh it off every time. Mason would throw an arm around my shoulders and say, "Sorry, Tanner's not my type." Then he'd wink. And somehow that always hurt more than it should have. The worst part? I never knew whether he realized how I felt. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But either way, I spent 2 years hopelessly in love with him. Then one day he met a girl named Olivia. 3 months later, they were officially together. 6 months later, I transferred schools. And that was pretty much the end of our story. Or so I thought. So where are you headed? Mason asked. Chicago. His eyebrows shot up. No way. My heart sank. Don't tell me. I'm going to Chicago too. I laughed. You're kidding. I'm not. Before I could respond, another announcement echoed through the station. Because of equipment issues, several passengers would be reassigned to different train cars. Everyone around us groaned. The employee at the gate began calling people forward to exchange tickets. Mason looked at me. This feels like the universe playing a joke. Wouldn't be the first time. 20 minutes later, we boarded. And that's when the real surprise happened. I found my compartment, opened the door, and nearly walked straight into Mason. We both stopped. No, no way. We looked at our tickets, then looked at each other. Same compartment, 2 beds, 8-hour overnight trip. Just us. Mason burst out laughing first. I just stood there holding my suitcase. You have got to be kidding me. I swear I didn't plan this, he said. I don't know if that makes it better. It definitely doesn't. Neither of us moved for a second. The compartment suddenly felt very small. The kind of small where you become aware of every movement, every glance, every breath. Eventually I stepped inside. Mason followed. The train whistle sounded outside. A few minutes later we were moving. And just like that, there was no escaping. Not from the compartment, and definitely not from the memories. For a while, we stuck to safe conversation. Jobs, cities, mutual college friends. The usual stuff people talk about when they're trying very hard not to discuss the thing they actually want to discuss. Mason worked in architecture now. I worked in marketing. He lived in Denver. I lived in Minneapolis. Simple, easy, safe. But beneath every conversation was the same question neither of us seemed willing to ask. Why did we disappear from each other's lives? Outside the window, rain streaked across the glass. The countryside blurred into darkness. The compartment lights felt warm and intimate, almost too intimate. At one point, Mason looked at me for a little longer than normal. "You haven't changed much." I laughed. "My knees disagree." "No, seriously." His smile softened. "You still look like Tanner." For some reason that hit harder than it should have. Because for years I'd wondered if he remembered me at all. Yet here he was looking at me like I was still familiar. Like I still mattered somehow. The silence stretched between us. Comfortable. Dangerous. Then Mason quietly asked, "Can I ask you something?" I felt my pulse quicken. "Sure." He looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "When you left college," his voice was careful, "why did you really leave?" And just like that, the question I'd spent 5 years avoiding finally stepped into the room. For a second, I couldn't answer. The steady rhythm of the train filled the silence between us. Mason's question wasn't unexpected. Honestly, I'd been wondering if he'd ask it ever since we'd stepped into the compartment. I just hadn't expected it this soon. I stared at the rain sliding down the window. "That's a complicated question." A small smile appeared on his face. "We've got 8 hours. Fair point." I leaned back in my seat. The truth sat heavily in my chest. 5 years later, it still hurt a little. Not as much as before, but enough. I was miserable. Mason frowned. "At school?" I nodded. "Partly." He waited. The thing about Mason had always been that he knew when to stay quiet. Most people rush to fill silence. Mason never did. And somehow that made it easier to tell the truth. I felt stuck. I shrugged. Nothing was going the way I wanted. "Your grades were great." "Grades weren't the problem." His eyes narrowed slightly. I could see him thinking, trying to put pieces together. Then he slowly asked, "Was it because of Olivia?" The name hit me like an unexpected punch. Not because I still cared about her, but because she represented everything. The moment everything changed. I laughed quietly. "Not exactly." Mason's expression grew more serious. The compartment seemed even smaller now. The train rocked gently beneath us. Outside, darkness swallowed the landscape. Finally, I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time all evening, I decided to stop hiding. "Honestly," he nodded. I took a breath. "Because I was in love with someone." The words landed between us. Mason didn't move. Neither did I. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Then he asked the obvious question. "Who?" I smiled. A sad smile. The kind you wear when you're remembering an old version of yourself. "A guy." Mason blinked. "Oh." His voice was soft, almost cautious. I looked away. "Yeah." The confession should have felt dramatic. Instead, it felt strangely relieving, like opening a window after years in a stuffy room. Mason stayed quiet. I appreciated that. After a minute, he spoke again. "Were you together?" I laughed. "No." His eyebrows lifted. "No? Nope. What happened?" I looked out the window again. The reflection staring back looked older than I felt. "Nothing happened." Mason frowned. "How can nothing happen?" "Trust me. It can." He studied me carefully. And then something shifted in his expression. Something thoughtful. Something that made my stomach tighten. Did I know him? I swallowed. There it was. The question. The one we'd both been circling around. I could lie. It would be easy. Probably smarter. Safer. Instead, I smiled. "Very well." The compartment became silent. Completely silent. Mason stared at me. I stared back. Neither of us spoke. Then slowly, unbelievably slowly, realization appeared on his face. His eyes widened. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for me to know. He knew. The train rattled over a section of track. The sound filled the room. Still neither of us spoke. Finally, Mason leaned back in his seat. His expression unreadable. "Tanner." I laughed nervously. "Yeah." "You mean?" "Yeah." His jaw tightened. Not in anger. More like shock. Genuine shock. For a moment, he looked down at his hands. Then out the window. Then back at me. 5 years ago, I dreamed about this conversation. Hundreds of times. Maybe thousands. Back then I imagined he'd smile. Maybe tell me he'd felt the same. Maybe kiss me. Maybe every ridiculous romantic fantasy my 19-year-old brain could invent. Reality was much quieter, much messier, and somehow more real. You never told me. I smiled. What exactly was I supposed to say? Mason opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed softly. Okay, fair. Imagine that conversation. I deepened my voice dramatically. Hey Mason, by the way, I'm hopelessly in love with you. Want to make things weird forever? Despite everything, he laughed. A real laugh. The tension eased slightly, but only slightly, because now everything was out in the open, or at least part of it. Mason rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he still had. I had no idea. That surprised me, genuinely surprised me. Seriously, seriously, I stared at him. All those years, all those moments, all those lingering looks, and he hadn't known? That seemed impossible. Yet his face looked completely sincere. I laughed again, mostly at myself. Well, that's embarrassing. Tanner. No, really? I shook my head. I spent 2 years convinced everyone knew. I didn't. His voice was firm, certain, and for some reason that hurt more than if he'd known all along. Because if he hadn't known, then maybe all those moments I'd obsessed over meant exactly what they looked like. Nothing. The thought stung. Even now, Mason seemed to sense it. I would have handled things differently. I looked at him. What does that mean? His gaze dropped. For the first time since we'd reunited, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. And that made me nervous. Because Mason was never uncomfortable. Not unless something mattered. The train continued rolling through the night. Steady. Relentless. And when he finally looked back at me, there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Regret. I wasn't as honest as you think I was. My pulse jumped. What are you talking about? Mason took a slow breath. Then he said the last thing I expected to hear. The reason Olivia and I broke up, he paused, was because of you. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The train rattled softly beneath us. Outside, the night stretched endlessly beyond the window. Inside the compartment, everything felt frozen. What? Mason looked away first. His jaw tightened. The reason Olivia and I broke up. I stared at him. You said it was because of me. It was. I laughed once. A short, confused laugh. Okay, you're going to have to explain that. He rubbed his hands together and sighed. I know. The strange thing was that Mason suddenly looked nervous. Not awkward. Not uncomfortable. Actually nervous. And in all the years I'd known him, I'd almost never seen that. I loved Olivia, he said. I nodded. I know. I really did. The words stung more than I expected. Not because I still cared. Because once upon a time I'd wanted to hear literally anything else. Mason looked at me. But something was wrong. I frowned. What do you mean? His eyes drifted toward the window. For months I kept feeling like I was missing something. The train swayed gently. Neither of us spoke. Then he continued. I thought maybe I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. I listened quietly. Then I thought maybe we were just incompatible. His smile was humorless. Then I thought maybe I was losing my mind. What actually happened? His gaze found mine. You happened. My stomach tightened. The compartment suddenly felt far too warm. Mason. I'm serious. He shook his head. I couldn't stop thinking about you. The words hit me harder than I was prepared for. For years I'd imagined hearing something like that. Now that it was happening, I didn't know what to do with it. What does that mean? He laughed softly. That's exactly the problem. I waited. I didn't understand it. His voice had become quieter now, more vulnerable. I wanted to spend every second with you. My chest tightened. You were the first person I looked for when something good happened. His eyes never left mine. The first person I wanted to talk to when something bad happened. The train continued rolling through darkness. Every word felt heavier than the last. I'd be sitting with Olivia and wondering what you were doing. He swallowed. And that made me feel like a terrible boyfriend. I couldn't speak. I honestly couldn't. 5 years of questions were suddenly being answered all at once. And I wasn't sure how to process any of it. So we started fighting. Mason sighed. Not because of you directly, but because of what you represented. I stared at him. What did I represent? His smile was sad. Something I didn't understand. Silence settled between us. The kind that wasn't empty. The kind filled with things neither person knows how to say. Finally I asked, "Did she know?" He nodded. Slowly. Eventually. I blinked. What? Mason looked embarrassed. She figured it out before I did. Of course she had. Sometimes outsiders see things more clearly than the people living them. What did she say? He laughed softly. I remember it perfectly. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling. You look at Tanner the way people are supposed to look at their partner. I felt my heart skip. Mason. Yeah. Why didn't you ever tell me this? The question came out quieter than I intended. His expression immediately changed. The regret returned. Because we both knew the answer. 5 years. 5 entire years. Gone. I was scared. That wasn't the answer I expected. I actually laughed. You? Yeah. His smile was small. Me? I shook my head. Mason, you were never scared of anything. You'd be surprised. The train entered a tunnel. Darkness swallowed the window. For a few seconds all I could see was our reflection staring back at us. 2 older versions of people who had once meant everything to each other. Then Mason quietly asked, "Can I tell you something really pathetic?" I smiled. Absolutely. His laugh returned briefly. I spent about a year trying to find your social media after you left. My heart nearly stopped. What? I know. Mason. I know. I stared at him, completely stunned. You never found me? You deleted everything. Fair. I had. Right after transferring schools. At the time it felt necessary. Every photo, every memory, every reminder, including him. I thought you hated me. His confession hit me unexpectedly hard. What? When you disappeared. His eyes lowered. You stopped answering texts. My chest tightened. You stopped returning calls. I remembered. God. I remembered. Every unanswered message. Every time I'd stared at his name on my screen and forced myself not to respond. Not because I hated him. Because I loved him too much. I didn't hate you. The words came out immediately. Without thought. Without hesitation. Mason looked up. For a second neither of us moved. Then I quietly admitted. I was trying to get over you. The truth hung in the air. Simple. Brutal. Honest. His eyes softened. And suddenly I saw something there. Something I wasn't prepared for. Pain. Real pain. Like those years had hurt him too. The realization changed everything. Because until this moment I'd always believed I was the only one who suffered after we lost each other. Apparently I was wrong. Very wrong. The train rocked gently as midnight approached. Neither of us spoke for a while. Eventually the attendant knocked and informed us the beds had been prepared. The compartment suddenly felt even smaller. 2 narrow beds. A long night ahead. And enough unresolved feelings to fill the entire train. As the attendant left, Mason looked at me and smiled. A nervous smile. The kind I'd never seen from him back in college. And then he said something that made my pulse immediately speed up. You know. I raised an eyebrow. What? His eyes held mine. If we're finally being honest with each other. He paused. There's something else I've wanted to tell you for a very long time. My heart immediately sped up. The compartment suddenly felt much smaller than it already was. Mason held my gaze for a second before looking away, which somehow made me even more nervous. What is it? I asked. He laughed quietly. You ever notice how weird timing is? That's not an answer. I know. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then it disappeared. The seriousness returned. Back in college, Mason had always been easy to read. Or at least I thought so. Now I wasn't so sure. 5 years changes people. It teaches them how to hide things, how to carry things, how to survive things. Mason leaned back against his seat. You remember that camping trip? My stomach dropped. Of course I remembered. There were hundreds of memories involving Mason. But that one had never left me. Which camping trip? He gave me a look. The lake, right? The lake. 3 days during our second year. Just the two of us. A cheap cabin. A fishing boat neither of us knew how to use. And what had easily been the best weekend of my life. I smiled despite myself. Yeah. His expression softened. I still think about that weekend. I swallowed. So do I. The words came out before I could stop them. His eyes met mine. For a second neither of us looked away. Then he nodded slowly. I figured. I laughed nervously. You figured. Tanner. His smile returned. You looked happier that weekend than I'd ever seen you. That was true. Painfully true. Because back then, I was convinced it meant something. The way we'd stayed up until 3 in the morning talking. The way we'd sat shoulder to shoulder on the dock. The way he always seemed to find reasons to be close. I'd spent months replaying every second afterward, trying to figure out if any of it had been real. Mason exhaled slowly. There was a moment. My pulse quickened. What moment? His jaw tightened slightly. The second night. Immediately I knew, because there was a moment I'd never forgotten either. The memory hit me instantly. The lake, the stars, the cold night air. We'd been sitting on the dock alone after midnight, neither of us wanting to go inside, talking about everything, dreams, family, fear, the future. At one point we'd fallen completely silent, just watching the water, and then I'd looked over. Mason had already been looking at me. Neither of us looked away, not for several seconds, maybe longer. Back then it had felt enormous, like something was about to happen. Then he'd smiled, looked away, and the moment vanished. At least that's what I thought. Now Mason was staring at the floor, as if reliving it too. I almost kissed you. Everything inside me stopped. The words landed like a physical impact. For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. What? His eyes lifted. I almost kissed you. I stared at him, completely stunned. 5 years. 5 years of wondering. And now this. Mason. I know. His voice was rougher now. I know. I shook my head. No. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I literally couldn't process it. What do you mean you almost kissed me? A sad smile appeared. Exactly what it sounds like. I covered my face briefly. You're kidding. I'm not. The train rolled through the darkness. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I thought I imagined that whole moment. His eyes widened slightly. You noticed. I laughed again. Noticed. I looked at him. Mason. I spent 2 years obsessing over that moment. His expression immediately softened. And for some reason that made everything worse. Because now I knew. I hadn't imagined it. Any of it. The chemistry. The tension. The connection. It had been real. The entire time. Mason. I shook my head. I don't understand. Neither did I. He rubbed the back of his neck. The same old nervous habit. I knew I wanted to. The confession came quietly. Honestly, I just didn't understand why. I stared at him. And now, for the first time all night, Mason didn't answer immediately. The question lingered between us. Heavy. Dangerous. Then he looked directly into my eyes and held my gaze. A few seconds passed. Long enough for my pulse to start racing again. Finally he smiled. Small. Vulnerable. Real. Now I understand. The air seemed to disappear from the compartment. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. Years seemed to collapse between us. 5 years. Gone. Suddenly I wasn't seeing the successful architect sitting across from me. I was seeing the 20-year-old guy who used to steal my fries, who fell asleep during movies, who laughed so hard he'd cry. The guy I'd loved. The guy I'd never really stopped loving. The realization hit me before I could stop it. And judging by the look on Mason's face, he just realized the exact same thing. The silence stretched. Comfortable. Terrifying. Then Mason laughed softly. We're really bad at this. What? Communication. I burst out laughing. Finally. Genuinely laughing. That's the understatement of the century. He grinned. There might be a trophy involved. We deserve it. Absolutely. For a few minutes everything felt lighter. Like years of tension had finally cracked. Not disappeared. Just loosened enough for us to breathe. Eventually the laughter faded. And the quiet returned. But this quiet felt different. Warmer. Closer. Mason glanced toward the beds. Then back at me. His expression suddenly becoming serious again. Tanner. Yeah. If things had been different. His voice softened. Would you have wanted me to kiss you that night? The question hit me harder than anything else had. Because there was only one honest answer. I looked directly at him. And smiled. More than anything. Mason closed his eyes briefly. As if those words hurt and healed him at the same time. When he opened them again, there was unmistakable emotion there. Emotion neither of us could hide anymore. And for the first time that night, I started to wonder whether this train ride was taking us somewhere neither of us had expected. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The train continued through the darkness, carrying us somewhere between our past and whatever came next. Mason was still looking at me, and I was still replaying his question. Would you have wanted me to kiss you that night? The truth was almost embarrassing. I'd wanted it for years. Not just that night. Not just at the lake. I wanted it every time he sat beside me in class. Every time he wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Every time he smiled at me like I was the only person in the room. Back then I'd convinced myself it was impossible. Now I wasn't sure what was real anymore. Mason exhaled slowly. I think about that weekend more than I should. I laughed softly. Apparently we're both guilty of that. His smile faded into something gentler. I think I knew I was losing you before you left. That caught me off guard. What? His eyes lowered briefly. The last few months. I frowned. What about them? You pulled away. The words were simple. Accurate. Painfully accurate. I remembered it immediately. The way I'd started making excuses. The way I'd avoided being alone with him. The way every conversation started hurting. Because being near him felt impossible. And being away from him felt worse. I was trying to protect myself. Mason nodded. I know that now. The compartment fell quiet again. Eventually I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind all night. What happened after I left? His expression shifted. That's a long story. We've still got time. A small smile appeared. Fair. He leaned back against his pillow. For a moment he seemed to be deciding how much to tell me. Then he sighed. Honestly, yeah. I was angry. That surprised me. At me. At first. I blinked. Why? Because I didn't understand. His voice was calm. No accusation. Just honesty. You disappeared. I looked down. Fair. I thought I'd done something. Mason. I'm serious. He laughed quietly. I spent months trying to figure out what happened. The guilt hit harder than I expected. Back then I'd thought leaving was the only way forward. I'd never considered what it looked like from his side. To him I'd simply vanished. I should have explained. His eyes met mine. Yeah. The word wasn't harsh. Just true. I nodded slowly. You're right. A few seconds passed. Then Mason smiled. But if we're being fair, I should have been honest too. I laughed. We're really building a long list tonight. We absolutely are. Outside, rain continued tapping softly against the window. The compartment lights had dimmed. The atmosphere felt strangely intimate now, like the rest of the train had disappeared. Like only this room existed. Only this conversation. Only us. Mason stretched slightly and shook his head. You know what's crazy? What? If someone had told me this morning that I'd spend tonight talking about college feelings with Tanner, I laughed. You would have run away? Immediately. Reasonable. He grinned. Then the grin faded, and suddenly his expression grew serious again. There was someone after you. The words hit unexpectedly. Of course there had been. 5 years was a long time. Still, something tightened in my chest. I tried not to show it. Oh, Mason noticed anyway. He always noticed. It wasn't serious. The speed of his response made me laugh. You don't need to explain. I kind of do. Why? His eyes held mine. Because there was only one answer. Neither of us said it. But we both understood it. The silence stretched. Then he spoke. We dated for about a year. I nodded. Okay. It ended. Another nod. Okay. Mason laughed. You are pretending not to care so hard right now. I rolled my eyes. I'm doing great. You're terrible at lying. So are you. Fair. We both laughed. And somehow that made everything easier. The old rhythm was still there. The one we'd always had. The effortless connection. The comfort. The understanding. 5 years hadn't destroyed it. Somehow it had survived. The realization made something warm spread through my chest. Mason must have felt it too, because he was smiling again. That familiar smile. The one I'd missed more than I ever admitted. Eventually he glanced at the clock. Nearly 1 in the morning. Maybe we should try sleeping. I looked at the narrow beds. Then at him. Then back at the beds. Mason immediately started laughing. What? You looked offended. I am offended. They're not that small. They're absolutely that small. His grin widened. For a second he looked exactly like the college version of himself. The version I'd fallen for. And that realization nearly made me forget how to breathe. Mason stood first. I'll take the top bunk. Such a gentleman. I know. He climbed up. I settled onto the lower bed. The compartment lights switched off moments later. Only a soft reading light remained near the door. The room became quiet. For the first time all evening, neither of us had anything to say. But sleep didn't come. Not for me. Probably not for him either. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of the train, listening to my own thoughts. 5 years. 5 years of unfinished feelings. 5 years of questions. And somehow every answer had arrived in a single night. Above me I heard Mason shift. Then his voice drifted down through the darkness. Tanner. My heart immediately sped up. Yeah. A pause. Long enough to make me nervous. Then, I'm glad it was you. I swallowed. What do you mean? His answer came quietly. Honestly. Out of everyone I've ever met. Another pause. I'm glad it was you that I fell for. The world seemed to stop. The train. The rain. Everything. And for the first time all night, neither of us tried to hide what this really was anymore. I didn't sleep after that. There was no chance. How was I supposed to sleep after hearing something like that? I lay staring at the ceiling while my heart refused to slow down. Above me, Mason had gone quiet again. But I knew he wasn't sleeping either. I could feel it. The same way I'd always been able to feel his moods back in college. Some things never change. The train continued rolling through the night. Steady. Relentless. Eventually I heard him shift again. Then a quiet laugh. You awake? I smiled into the darkness. Obviously. Yeah. A few seconds passed. Then, sorry. That made me sit up slightly. For what? For dropping that on you. I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. Mason. Yeah. Don't apologize. Silence. Then a quiet exhale from above. The kind of exhale that carries years of tension. I should have said it sooner. The words hung in the darkness. I understood exactly what he meant. Not tonight. Years ago. Back when we still had time. Back when everything could have been different. I stared toward the small window. Rain still traced patterns across the glass. I should have told you how I felt. Mason laughed softly. Look at us. What? Two idiots. I couldn't argue with that. Not even a little. The train rocked gently beneath us. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Then I heard movement. A moment later Mason climbed down from the top bunk. My pulse immediately sped up. Not because of what he was doing. Because of how naturally he did it. Like he belonged there. Like being beside me was the most normal thing in the world. He sat across from me on the small seat by the window. Moonlight and passing station lights occasionally illuminated his face. Neither of us spoke. For the first time all night, words seemed unnecessary. Mason looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Finally, he spoke. "You know what the worst part is?" I looked at him. "What?" His smile was sad. "I compare everyone to you." The confession hit harder than anything else had. Harder because of how simple it was, how honest it was. No dramatic declaration, no grand speech, just truth, raw and uncomplicated. I swallowed. "Mason, I'm serious." He looked down briefly. "Every relationship." His voice stayed quiet. "Every date." His eyes found mine again. No one ever felt the same. The compartment seemed impossibly still. The train continued moving, but everything inside the room felt frozen. Couldn't look away. Neither could he. The realization settled over both of us at the same time. We weren't talking about college anymore. We weren't talking about old feelings. We were talking about now. About this moment. About what still existed between us. And judging by the look in Mason's eyes, it was a lot. His voice softened. "Tell me something honestly." "Okay. Have you ever gotten over me?" The question landed directly in my chest. No room to hide. No room for half-truths. Just honesty. The thing we'd both avoided for years. I smiled weakly. "You really picked the easy questions tonight." He laughed, but his eyes never left mine. Waiting, hoping, maybe fearing the answer. I took a slow breath. Then I told him the truth. "No." The word barely left my mouth. But it changed everything. Mason closed his eyes. Just briefly, as if hearing it affected him more than he expected. When he opened them again, emotion was written all over his face. I didn't either. The train rolled onward. Miles disappearing behind us. Years disappearing with them. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The distance between us suddenly felt much smaller than before. Mason leaned forward slightly. Not much. Just enough. Enough to make my pulse race. Enough to remind me how close we actually were. "Tanner." His voice was almost a whisper now. "Yeah." A long pause. The longest one yet. Then, "I've spent 5 years wondering what would have happened if I'd kissed you at that lake. Couldn't breathe. Not properly. Not after that." His eyes held mine. Steady. Certain. No confusion anymore. No uncertainty. Just honesty. The same honesty we'd been building toward all night. And for the first time since this train ride began, I stopped thinking about the past. Stopped thinking about regrets. Stopped thinking about lost years. Because Mason wasn't looking at me like someone remembering an old love. He was looking at me like someone seeing a future. And that realization changed everything. Outside the window, the first faint hints of dawn began appearing on the horizon. The night was ending. But somehow it felt like something else was only just beginning. Neither of us noticed when the sky started changing. One moment it was night. The next, pale blue light was creeping across the horizon outside the train window. Dawn. I glanced toward the glass, then back at Mason. He was still looking at me, and somehow that felt more significant than anything else. 5 years. 5 years apart. 5 years of wondering. And now here we were, sharing a train compartment, talking about things we'd never managed to say when it mattered. Or maybe it still mattered. Maybe that was the point. Mason leaned back in his seat and laughed quietly. "You know what's weird?" "What?" "I thought seeing you again would be awkward." I smiled. "It was awkward." "Okay, fair." We both laughed. The tension that had dominated the first part of the night felt different now. Not gone, just transformed. Softer, warmer, hopeful. Mason shook his head. "I can't believe we're actually having this conversation." "Neither can I." His eyes drifted toward the window. "I used to imagine running into you. That surprised me." "You did. All the time." I laughed. "Seriously. Seriously." His smile widened. "In airports." I laughed. "Airports. Coffee shops." This is getting specific. I had a lot of free time. That made me laugh harder. The sound filled the compartment. For a moment we were just two friends again. The way we'd once been. Easy, natural, comfortable. Then Mason's smile softened. But every version ended differently. I felt my pulse quicken. Oh, he nodded. Sometimes you hated me. I blinked. What? Sometimes you were married. I laughed. Wow. One time you became a famous author. Okay. Now we're getting ridiculous. His grin returned. I know. The laughter faded. A comfortable silence followed. Then Mason looked directly at me. The one thing every version had in common. I waited. He smiled. You were happy. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. Because they were so simple. So sincere. No hidden meaning. No agenda. Just genuine care. The same care that had always existed between us. The thing that had made losing him hurt so much. I swallowed. That's a nice thing to say. It's true. Our eyes met. Held. Neither of us looked away. The train continued racing through the early morning light. Fields and small towns passed by outside. The world was waking up. And somehow I felt like I was too. Eventually Mason stood and stretched. I watched him move around the compartment. Still familiar. Still somehow the same person beneath all the years. He caught me looking. A grin immediately appeared. What? I rolled my eyes. Nothing. You're staring. So are you. Good point. Neither of us denied it. Neither of us wanted to. The honesty between us had become impossible to ignore. And strangely enough, it felt good. Liberating. After years of hiding. After years of pretending. We didn't have to anymore. Mason sat back down. This time beside me. Not across from me. Beside me. Close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Neither of us commented on it. Neither of us moved away. The silence settled comfortably around us. Then Mason spoke. Quietly. Tanner. Yeah. His gaze remained on the passing landscape. What happens when we get to Chicago? The question had been coming all night. Sooner or later one of us had to ask it. Because trains end. Journeys end. Real life waits at the station. I looked out the window. The city wasn't visible yet. But it was coming. Fast. I don't know. It was the honest answer. Mason nodded. Me neither. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then he laughed softly. I hate that answer. Me too. He turned toward me. And suddenly the uncertainty I'd seen throughout the night was gone. Replaced by something stronger. Something clearer. I don't want to lose you again. The words were direct. Certain. No hesitation. My heart tightened immediately. Because I knew exactly what he meant. Not just friendship. Not just staying in touch. Something deeper. Something we'd both spent years avoiding. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man sitting beside me. The man who'd once been my first love. The man who had somehow become my first love all over again in a single night. And for the first time, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt possible. I don't want that either. Relief immediately appeared on his face. Real relief. Like he'd been holding his breath waiting for that answer. Then he smiled. That smile. The same one. The one that had always ruined me. I was hoping you'd say that. The train announcement interrupted us. Chicago. Less than an hour away. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The reality settled in. The trip was almost over. But surprisingly, neither of us looked sad. Because for the first time all night, it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something we'd waited far too long to start. The last hour passed faster than the entire night. Neither of us wanted to say it. But we both felt it. The train was approaching Chicago. Soon the compartment that had somehow changed both our lives would just be another memory. Only this time, neither of us intended to become one. Morning sunlight filled the cabin. The rain was gone. The world outside looked fresh and new. Mason sat beside me, one arm resting against the window ledge. Every now and then our shoulders brushed when the train shifted. Neither of us moved away. Neither of us pretended not to notice. felt ridiculous. After everything we'd confessed, after everything we'd learned, a simple touch still made my heart race. The city skyline eventually appeared in the distance. Tall buildings rising against the bright morning sky. Chicago. Almost there. Mason saw it too. His smile faded slightly, not from sadness, from nerves. For the first time all night, he seemed uncertain again. I knew why. The train had made honesty easy. Real life was different. Real life came with consequences, expectations, risk. Eventually he looked at me. "What are you doing today?" I laughed. "That's your smooth transition? It's all I've got." "Terrible." "I know." I smiled. "My meeting isn't until tomorrow." His eyebrows lifted. Mine too. We both stared at each other, then laughed. Because of course, after everything else that had happened, that somehow felt inevitable. The train began slowing. Announcements echoed through the car. Passengers started gathering bags. The reality of arrival settled over us. Mason looked down briefly, then back at me. "Tanner." "Yeah." His expression became serious. The playful smile disappeared. Only honesty remained. "I don't want to spend another 5 years wondering." My pulse immediately quickened. The noise of the train station outside seemed to disappear. All I could hear was him. All I could see was him. The same guy I'd fallen for years ago. Only now he wasn't running from the truth. Neither of us were. "What are you saying?" His eyes never left mine. "I'm saying I know what I want." The words landed directly in my chest. Simple, clear, certain. No confusion. No mixed signals. No guessing. For the first time since I'd met him, Mason was telling me exactly how he felt. And somehow that meant more than every fantasy I'd ever had. The train finally stopped. Passengers began exiting. But neither of us moved. Not yet. Not until Mason smiled. A nervous smile this time. One I'd never seen before. "I'd really like to take you to dinner." I laughed, relief flooding through me. "That's your big speech?" He groaned. "It sounded better in my head. Architects should not write romantic dialogue." Noted. I couldn't stop smiling. Neither could he. Then I gave him the answer he'd waited years to hear. "I'd love to." The smile that appeared on his face was worth every lost year. Every mistake. Every regret. Every mile of this train ride. For a moment we simply looked at each other. No rush. No pressure. No fear. Just two people finally standing in the truth they'd avoided for far too long. Eventually passengers began squeezing past our compartment. Reality forced its way back in. Mason grabbed his suitcase. I grabbed mine. Together we stepped off the train. The station buzzed with life. People rushing everywhere. Announcements echoing overhead. Yet somehow everything felt calm. Simple, right? We walked side by side through the terminal, just like we used to back in college. Only this time something was different. Neither of us was pretending. Near the station exit, Mason stopped walking. I turned toward him. He looked nervous again, which honestly was becoming adorable. "What?" He laughed. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up." "Same." "Good." For a second we simply stood there. The crowd flowed around us. Nobody paid attention. Nobody cared. It was just us. Finally Mason smiled. The same smile that had started everything years ago. The same smile that somehow still felt like home. "I guess this is where we stop acting like idiots." I laughed. "That's probably for the best." "Definitely." Then he held out his hand. Not as a handshake. Not formally. Just naturally. Like someone inviting me into the next chapter of his life. And for the first time in years, I didn't hesitate. I took it. His fingers closed around mine. Warm. Certain. Real. No more mischances. No more unfinished stories. No more wondering what might have happened. Because sometimes first loves don't disappear. Sometimes they simply take the long way home. And as Mason and I walked out of the station together, sunlight spilling across the city streets ahead of us, I realized something. The train ride wasn't the miracle. Meeting him again wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that after all those years, after all those mistakes, after all that distance, we'd been given one more chance. And this time, neither of us intended to waste it.